Hello, I'm Fara Sax. This is the Community Voice. The descendants of the Holocaust survivors carry the strength and resilience of their ancestors, committed to preserving their stories of survival and of loss. My guests, inspired by their own families' own histories and experience, serve as speakers, docents, and educators in South Florida, ensuring the memory of the Holocaust endures and advocating for the future free from these such horrible atrocities. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so
Our
much for having
pleasure.
us.
Ralph, Hagit, Jen, thank you. Tell me why we're here. Tell me a lot about your family, the experience that you have as speakers, docents, and survivors, ancestors for speaking to your relatives. I feel like we're doing like this Indian tribal revival here, but it's such an important experience that you're experiencing and your life's work. Hagit, tell me about your family.
Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for having my fellow docents here. I want to first start with just some gratitude and say that by you bringing our families who aren't with us anymore, their stories alive, you're helping us honor and remember them. So I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with Rose, my grandmother, and Boris was my grandfather. They were survivors. And when I was about in second grade, very young, they took me for a walk outside with my grandfather's encouragement. He started telling me bits and pieces about their experience during the Holocaust. And my grandmother went through several camps and was experimented on by Dr. Mengele. My grandfather also, they were both in ghettos, and my grandfather helped smuggle people out into the Soviet side. So I was getting these drips and drabs, but by the time I was in middle school, I asked if I could just sit them down and tape the story because it was just so much for me to process being so young. And from that time, when they saw how interested I was in it, they really told me everything, and especially my grandmother, who did not talk to anyone else about it. She, throughout my life, told me.
We're looking at the pictures as you were speaking, and it's just so beautiful to see Rose and you. The special story about this photo.
Yes. So this is my grandmother, who was actually not supposed to live that long, to hold her first great-granddaughter, my oldest daughter, who was born, but she wanted so badly to have that experience to hold her great-grandchild. And just as a little aside, when she was experimented on, it was to make her sterile. So she was never supposed to have children. She was the sole survivor in her family and in her community. So the miracle that she was able to have 2 children herself and then come to that day that she was having a great grandchild was such a gift and such a blessing. I cherish that moment of her with my daughter. And it was the stories, I knew she was heartbroken, but even the picture that you flashed of her at my wedding day, right before I walked under the wedding canopy to the chuppah, she pulled me aside and she said, at my chuppah, I fainted. And I asked her, why? Why did you faint? Were you still starving? Or maybe you thought you were marrying the wrong person? And she said, no. I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and I saw not one family member survived. Not one person knowing me growing up survived. And she just looked up and fainted. And that's when she could really finally grieve, because during the Holocaust, she was just in survival mode. So I understood how this pain carried on the rest of her life, even though she survived. And so it's a gift to me to be able to tell you and anybody who will listen her story.
We're back live. Danny, bring us back to camera into the studio and tell me a little bit about what happened with Mengele. Did she talk about that with you?
She said that the experiments were both on men and women. She would line them up, he would line them up in a row, and there was doctors. They would not talk to them. It's not like they could find out what they were doing, and they would inject them with certain materials, and it was not a clean place. This was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, so the Jewish part was the Birkenau part. It was very primitive. She said when she would go into the barrack, it reminded her of an oven, so people would sleep. She said we were like loaves of bread in the oven, just stacked up on each other. She said that she had friends who couldn't even take it because she came from an Orthodox family, and she would pray and pray for some relief from God with none. And previous to being Auschwitz-Birkenau, she was in the Lodz ghetto for a few years. She watched her entire family die of starvation. So the things she saw in those years in Lodz, the things she saw in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the things she saw in Bergen-Belsen and Elsnig, a subcamp of Buchenwald, were unbelievable, unexplainable how humans could do that to other humans. So it was painful. She'd often be staring off into space, and she was in grief for the rest of her life.
And what we've talked about is that she shared the stories with you, but she didn't share them with her direct offspring, her children.
I think she was protecting them. She was so close with my mother. She didn't want to put that burden, even to the point that she said to my mother, "You don't have to go ever back to Poland." She would never go back to Poland herself. She said, "My grandchildren can go, but you don't need to go," because she understood her close bond with my mother would cause her too much pain and grief if she knew the details of what her mother went through. But by the time I came around and I was curious, I think she was scared that the stories would die with her. So she gave me that responsibility of sharing what she went through, even though she couldn't go, let's say, like Jen and Ralph's parents, grandparents and parents, she couldn't go speak publicly. This was too painful for her to ever say. So the responsibility became mine.
Absolutely. And then you became a docent, an organization called 3G. You also,
3G,
and all of you are speaking for the Holocaust Memorial during that time as well. So you're continuing this to tell the stories of your own personal and bringing education about the Holocaust to young people, older people, students, and the work that you're doing is amazing, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Ralph, your family also, it comes in a different way.
Right.
Tell us about your story.
First, let me thank you for the opportunity to tell the story. It is so important to educate. And my parents were adamant about Holocaust education. They went to schools, they gave radio interviews. And they started in the 60s. And remember, prior to that, not too many people wanted to hear about the Holocaust. After the Eichmann trial, after the movie Judgment at Nuremberg, things changed.
Absolutely. And we're looking at some pictures right now of your family after liberation. And I want to hear the story, but this is beautiful. Tell me about this picture.
This we call the wedding picture. It was taken in Rome, where my parents were married on Valentine's Day, 1947. They didn't know it was Valentine's Day. And we cherish it.
And tell me about where they were during the Holocaust.
Sure.
We can go back live, Danny.
My dad was a rabbinical student when Hitler first invaded Poland and Belarus. He was captured twice by the Nazis and escaped. After the second escape, he wandered on his own for a year. Often being hidden by righteous Gentiles. In that year, 130 of his relatives were murdered. And he realized, he always had very good instincts. He realized that his only chance of survival was to be with other Jews. So he attached himself to a slave labor gang and went into the ghetto. At a certain point, he realized there's going to be a massacre. He was right. And he and others, 6 other men, escaped. And this was after being told that the Belsky brothers were forming a Jewish partisan unit. Partisans, resistance fighters. And he was one of the original members and the organizers. Another 8 escaped shortly thereafter. Those 15 men elected Tuvia Belsky to be the commander, and they rescued other Jews, and they fought. They fought the Nazis, often with Soviet detachments. My mom came from a very religious family, but she was very progressive. She wrote prose and poetry. She was in community theater. She belonged to 2 different Zionist groups. The British mandate prevented her from making Aliyah to Israel at the time.
Oh, interesting.
So she obtained papers to go to South Africa. 3 of her aunts had already emigrated there. But the Nazis closed that door. The world that my parents lived in was destroyed. A massacre took place in what was called the Novigrad Ghetto, not terribly far from the Lodz Ghetto, on August 7th, 1942, 10 years to the day before I was born. 4,000 Jews were murdered, and most of my mother's family. My mother and her sister-in-law, Judy Gulkovich, survived the massacre by hiding in a cesspool for 6 days without food or water. They were rescued by my uncle, Ben-Zion Gulkovich, and they escaped, and they joined the Belsky Brigade. You have a picture of the brigade guarding an airstrip, and in that picture, there is a soldier. That's it.
That's it.
3 from the right, sitting down, light-colored fatigues, holding a machine gun. That's my mother. She was the first woman to be issued a weapon.
Wow.
And they were in the forests for a bit more than 2 years. They crossed 6 different countries in war-torn Europe, lived in Italy for 2 years, waiting for passage either to the United States or to Israel. While in the DP camps, an American reporter who spoke Yiddish spoke to them, and my dad said I was the youngest of 7 children. My oldest brother was a GI in World War I, and my dad was the baby of the family. And the reporter said, "Do you know where he lives?" Because remember, in those days, you had to have a sponsor, someone who would say, these people will never take welfare, never become a ward of the state, etc. And my dad said, I was a baby, I was an infant when he was born, but I remember it had a funny name, Jumping Fields. And the reporter said, Springfield? And my dad said, yes, Springfield. So they put announcements in the Jewish war veteran papers. Bart Simpson's not the only one who lives in Springfield. My Uncle Harry and his wife, my Aunt Ruth, lived in Springfield, Mass. And Aunt Ruth saw the announcement, and that's how they found out that family members had survived.
Wow. Wow.
And again, my parents really were passionate about Holocaust education.
And it's amazing that the work that you're doing now is all about that. In
Absolutely.
and your other life, I know you have a real work that you're doing outside as an arbitrator, but as well as this Holocaust education, which is so important. So you're living their legacy.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to do this.
Thank you. Jen, you tell me about Bubby.
Thank you.
We all have
Thank
a Bubby,
you.
a grandma.
Yes, we do.
Tell me about your Bubby.
Thank you for having me on today. This is really, truly an honor. Thank you. So my grandmother, who I called Bubby, which in the Jewish language just means grandmother, was a lady that was full of life. Any room that she walked into, everybody, she had everyone's attention. She had this crown of blonde hair and blue eyes, which I always tell the students was exactly what the Nazis called the Aryan race. And she was just always making a joke out of something. She was a very stern and serious lady. But I think, like most Jews, we always take the turmoil and the horrible things that we've endured, and we make humor out of it because that's how we move forward. So my grandfather and her were both from Hungary. They both survived. I did not know my grandfather's story. And I'd like to say that my grandmother's story found me because she would go to schools and my father would tell her story on her behalf, and she would be there. She would answer the questions that the students had, but he would really tell the story. And one day they came to my school, and I got to hear it for the first time.
So in other words, they never told it to you.
Never told it to me personally.
One-on-one, but you
never
heard it.
one-on-one.
Isn't
I
that
heard it
interesting?
with 250 other kids my age. And afterwards, all my friends were so intrigued, and because she really was full of life and a character. And, when she went to these schools, she really impacted these students. They had relationships with her. They wrote letters to her and they hugged her and they cried with her. And so it really was incredible that she went from living a normal teenage girl life in Hungary, never in a million years thought she would ever leave Hungary, and in 1 month's time was deported to Auschwitz. And I point that out when I speak to the students because they're teenagers. We look at survivors and they're old, but they weren't at the time when they were enduring this. And they are most likely the same age as the students that we're talking to.
And your grandmother, how old was she at the time?
She was 19. She was the oldest of 7 children in her family.
She was in Auschwitz. That was the only.
She was in Auschwitz. Then she got sent on the death marches, and she went to Bergen-Belsen, and from there to Braunschweig. And she was in her last moments before liberation. She was lined up in a field with 2,000 other women. There was a machine gun in the middle. They were about to all be shot. And the Swedish, they had an initiative to go and try and save as many camp prisoners as they could. And they negotiated for the release of these 2,000 women who moments later would have all been shot. Even up until the last minute, they were still exterminating any Jews that were alive. And so she always had an appreciation for a second chance at life. She lived life to the fullest. She made humor of some of her experience, and she passed that on to us, that you just have to move forward. You can't sit in the past with hatred. She always told the students that if you fill your heart with love, there will be no room left for hate. And that was a message that she always ended on and left with them. And it's now the message that we tell the students that we talk to,
Right.
And for yourself, do you just because that was her message doesn't mean that you identify with her message and it resonates with you, because there's probably whatever the feelings are. I can't put that into words because these are your feelings, but tell me, do you feel the same way?
I do. And I tell the students that if they're the platform, or if they are following an organization and that message is hateful and violent, it will never win. It will never go anywhere from that. Only love produces good things. We only progress and make wonderful things in life out of love. And I tell them that, in a room full of darkness, if you light a match, what does that match do? It lights up that whole room of darkness. And I encourage them to be that spark of light and to never indulge in hate. They could dislike things, but never hate, that. And we teach them the end result of hate is what happened in the Holocaust. That's what it leads to.
Ralph, for you, with your parents, you're a 2G, which means that you're a direct descendant of a Holocaust survivor
Right.
family member. What was the value? What did your parents say? What was it? A message of hope? Was it a message of anger? What did you take away from what they experienced firsthand when they told you these stories, which are beautifully written in this book, that are the compilations of stories and poetry that your mother wrote?
Correct. My mom's memoirs, my dad's memoirs, and my mom's poetry, and a few words from me and my late brother, Al. People have asked me, did you feel like you were the same as other kids or different? Well, we were the same, but we were different. All the kids with American parents had big families. The holidays, big dinners, lots of people. And we'd ask our parents, how come we don't have a lot of relatives? And, what could they do? In an age-appropriate manner, they told us, there are good people and there are bad people.
Absolutely.
And there were bad people called Nazis, and they murdered our family. And when we would ask questions as we got older, we got very straightforward answers. But their main priority, the message to us, yes, education was very, very important. Material things, not so important. Fine to have fun, but remember, life could be serious. But paramount, be a mensch. Be a decent human being, whatever you do. And they set the examples, and we tried to follow them.
And your beautiful grandmother, Rose.
She, I learned so much from her. So one story that she would tell me is that when she was in the kitchen in Elsnig, she was making breakfast for the SS women. And there was a hidden corridor from the kitchen to the infirmary. And she was at that point so dehumanized and starving. All of her family was already killed from starvation. And she knew that she would be killed if they caught her, but she said she just wanted to feel human again. So she decided to smuggle a pot of porridge that she'd make for the SS women to the infirmary. And it just reminded me that even in my lowest point, kindness and helping others and giving love from her example, that's what was my life's meaning, is to help other people. And I got that from her. She always gave me so much love, even though she was in pain, with food, with kindness. She was my nurse. Whenever I was sick, she would come and take care of me and rub me with rubbing alcohol and give me all the Bubba Misas.
I think that's where the name Bubby comes from. Bubba Misas.
Yes. So
things that are not really meaningful and going to help, but make you feel good in your soul.
Yes. So I hope that what her and my grandfather gave to me, all that love, they would take every card for my birthday, and they would kiss it with their lipstick
Aw.
and write "A million kisses, love, Grandma Rose and Grandpa Boris." And so at the end, when I present to students, I give them back the "a million kisses." I give them little Hershey kisses and say, "This is from them. This is from me. A million kisses to you."
So sweet.
Yeah.
And, I feel like they were a gift in my life. And I hope the love and the kindness and compassion they gave to me, I can give it back to the world.
Beautiful. This is the moment. This is the moment.
Right.
Talk to me about the work that you're doing now. We have only a couple of minutes left. Let's talk about that, moving it forward. Coming from the perspective of firsthand, secondhand stories, just tell me about the work that you're doing with the Holocaust Memorial, as Docent, as working with the 2 and 3G organization. Jen, tell me a little bit about that. And it's so important because your family's walked the walk. They've talked the talk. They've given you these stories, these tidbits. This is not some imaginary fairy tale. This horror really happened.
When you hear the 6 million number, it's too unfathomable to
Right.
comprehend. You can't possibly put that into perspective. But when we go in and we tell the students the story of one person,
So you go
Right.
into high schools, you go into
we
middle
start at
schools.
4th grade.
Okay.
Hagit has gone in and spoken to 4th grade, and we go up. We will speak to anyone and anyone who will listen to us. But we really, I think, who we impact the most, who we speak to the most, are the public schools and mostly non-Jewish students. And when they hear this story, we tell them this is the Holocaust. This happened to the Jews, but this is not just about the Jews. It is about humanity. This is one human story and what they endured and what they went through. This did not start with the gas chambers. It started with
Right.
words. We talk to the students about their actions, their words. They impact their lives and the lives of the people around them. And we hope that when they hear these stories, they gain empathy. These stories that they sit with them forever, just as they've impacted our lives. We hope that it impacts their lives, and that they, are good citizens and good, friends to each other. And we talk about bullying and
Right.
how these stories, we have all been trained how to connect these stories with students today and how it really should resonate with them.
And then you're also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, when I speak to groups at the memorial or
We have
go,
pictures of the memorial. Let's look
yes,
at that. This is all combining with the Holocaust Memorial, which is on Miami Beach.
right.
Look at this. This is a magnificent opportunity. Talk about a little bit about this, Ralph, what people
This is
experience while
Kenneth
there.
Treaster's sculpture, Love and Anguish. The work that the memorial does is just outstanding, bringing thousands of students and adult groups to the memorial to learn about the Holocaust. There's a learning center that will be opening up hopefully very early next year. And there will be
Let's see the next slide. Yeah.
there will be a hologram there of a survivor answering questions as student asked. When I first saw this, honestly, it gave me the willies, the hologram.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw how students reacted to it. And whatever makes them pay attention is fine with me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I also, when I'm there, I try to talk about the legacy of the partisans. First of all, when they could, Jews fought back, both physically and spiritually. It is amazing that 30,000 Jews were able to escape and join different partisan groups. And secondly, most of the partisans were in their teens and 20s, not that much older than the students we're talking to at times.
And what is also fascinating coming up is there's going to be a new exhibit attached. We saw one of the pictures with it looked like four little silos of empty space. But what's
Right.
going on underneath? Tell me a little bit about that, Hagit.
So that's our new education center that Ralph was mentioning. We're so excited because
There it is, right there.
Yeah.
as there's no longer survivors left to give their firsthand testimony, the students can bear witness with the holograms, and the technology is such that the student can ask the hologram any question, and it's been designed to answer every question, thousands of questions. So the technology is really bringing us into 2025.
And when is this expected?
Early
end of the year.
2026.
Wow.
Right.
This is going to be amazing because there's
Yes.
only 245,000 survivors left.
Right.
And this is just a beautiful way. Will they really be the stories, or are they AI generated?
No, this is real survivors were filmed over many hours, many days.
Yeah.
And were asked every single question you could possibly think to ask. So the technology is phenomenal.
We have 20 seconds. Anything you want to leave? One of you can choose. If you want more information, it'll be on the bottom of your screen, because to come and learn more about the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach, or the 3G group that is two of you out of three of you.
3G Miami was
Right.
created because there will be a day when there will not be any survivors left to tell their stories. And 3G Miami is that. We are the grandchildren. There are some 2Gs as well, the children, grandchildren of survivors, and we tell their stories so that they are not forgotten. They are not lost in history. They are still very much alive through these stories.
Ralph, anything final word?
United young people can make a difference.
Hagit.
Thank you. And your words matter. Everything you post on social media, everything you say, all of the suffering of our families started with words. And if we can think about our own words, at least if I could think about my own words and give the world love and kindness, this will never happen again.
Words of kindness and love, and the words that you gave to our audience today with sharing with me. Magnificent. Thank you. I got to know each of your families just a little bit, a little speck
Thank
of
you.
their spirit. And I hope they were in the room with us today. And thank you for being that conduit.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
joining
you
me.
so much.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for joining me. I'm Fara Sax.